Well, I'm going to take you on a roller coaster ride of my 54 years of journey. Not all. I'm just going to give you glimpses of it. I'm going to talk about the exciting things that has happened, that things that worked. I was born in Palpa, the western part of Nepal. I had not even seen any vehicle, not even a car, till I was 6 years old. I was the first generation of female literates in my family. My mother never got to go to school. I felt very privileged. And that is when I made up my mind that I will. As I got an opportunity, I am going to work with women and for women. And I had to realize their dream. So my professional career, I started when I was 19 years old. I did my master's in English literature. And at the tender age, I would say, of 19, after facing the Public Service Commission then, I started teaching English literature. So I have more than 20,000 young Nepali women as students. And then I started my professional career by going to administration. Those were the days, the early 80s or late 70s, when anything on women was welfare. They were the bichari mahila, who didn't have, who were more like liability. They were not considered as assets. So in those days I started, and I started with a revolutionary program. Since we have so many bankers in the room, I feel very privileged to share this. So I was one of the first people to start microcredit for the underprivileged, the women who are under the poverty line. And it was called Production Credit for Rural Women program. And as fate would have it, I was given the responsibility to be the chief of Women Development Program. And you can assess. My mandate given by the government of Nepal in the Ministry of Panchayat and Development was to uplift women as a class. And can you imagine how much money I was given? $1,000. For the 51% of women in Nepal to be uplifted, empowered with $1,000 and 2 support staff. So that was the whole concept. Words like empowerment. People didn't know what it was. There was no word like sustainability. There was nothing called self-reliance, independence. No rights were talked about. So those were the days. I'm just painting a little scenario. Then I started the production credit for rural women in 5 districts. And my negotiation started with the bank. And they were very eager because it was something specific for women. So they wanted to know what special I wanted. Was it low interest rate for women or any affirmative action? I said nothing special. I demanded for 2 things. I said, in the banking system, start a sex disaggregated data. Find out how much the men are borrowing, how much the women are borrowing, and what is the disbursement rates, how much, who is paying back how much. And that will itself be a learning. And the next thing I asked was, as we were training this new cadre of women development officers, I requested, can your bank managers and your bank field assistant can be trained together as a team to go to the districts? That was agreed on. And believe me, in 1 year, the results were out. The bankers believed me and believed in the women because they were creditor worthy. And the repayment rates were fantastic. And on the other hand, there's evidence that Nepal Rashtra Bank changed their forms into more women-friendly forms, because the name of the husband had to be asked first. But now when they borrowed on group collateral, that was not needed. So with that change, we were very enthusiastic. This new cadre there at the field level, and we there at the central level. So my job was to monitor as well as to convince donors. So in the span of 10 years, I was able to convince 14 donors. And I got the funds of more than 30 million for the program in 10 years. And along with the 14 donors, the program went on. And here I would want to say two things. Many evaluations happen. Since the morning we have been talking about research, knowledge-based advocacy. So in that, it always came out in flying colors that the women development officers who worked at the district level, they were an asset to the government they were working for and the gender. So that was the program. And as I was busy doing this, UNIFEM was decentralizing. That UNIFEM, the United Nations Development Fund for Women, they were looking for a director for South Asia. And their eyes fell on me. And the proposal was, can you help us to expand this to all over South Asia? I was very excited. And on the other hand, what was happening in Nepal was the program was, PCRW was being, from 49 districts, now it covers all the 77 districts of Nepal. And it was also replicated in Burundi in Africa too. So it was a very successful program. It is still. And recently, there's a evaluation done by the government of Nepal, and it gives the figures that this program has reached more than 1 million Nepali women. So it was a huge success. And while doing this, thank you. And while I was doing this, I was given a larger challenge, and that was working in UNIFEM. I was given the responsibility of 9 countries. Then Afghanistan was not a part of SAARC. The 7 SAARC countries, Iran and Afghanistan. So can you imagine, I was dealing with one government, rural women, that was my periphery. And now my canvas became huge, 9 governments. And all the women's groups, the gender advocates, the different groups I worked with. But I had firm faith in these years. I had developed a trust between the women and myself. I knew they were honest, they were wise, though they didn't go to school, they didn't have the opportunity to go to school, they were discriminated throughout, but their coping mechanisms was fantastic. It was worth copying. We talk about multitasking. The kind of multitasking they did was amazing. And it always surprised me, the way they could find solutions for themselves. While talking, two things I felt. It was very important to work with women themselves at the grassroots level, at the micro level. But just knowing their agonies, just hearing their stories, understanding their pain, their majburi as we call it. And we didn't either have the resources or the power to solve. So I had to convince the people at the meso level, the right holders, people who had the responsibility, who had the duty, who were the service providers. The diverse network and alliances I worked with was to convince, link their voices to them so they would be convinced. So I've just tried to put a chart where I talk about the different categories of people I worked with. The network of judges, the police officers, as the photographs show you, with interfaith leaders, the media, which is very, very powerful, and networks like SAPAT, men's alliances. SAPAT is the South Asian professionals, where doctors, lawyers, judges, media people, and NGOs are all part of it. So they were there. And this was the right forum to amplify the feeble voice of women from the micro level. So their voices reached there. And that led to changes in macro policies, like the big policies like the national development plans, the census exercise, gender responsive budget exercises, the big things that happen. And only, sometimes we feel Nepal is Kathmandu. So it was proving it is not. And during starting PCRW, I have had the opportunity to walk. Now you see me in a wheelchair, but I have walked to 65 districts of Nepal, just trying to find out where these excluded women are. Where are they? Where the fruits of development have never reached them. I had to bring them. In terms of getting huge groups of women to talk to policy planners and say, this is not done. This needs to be done. And I have thousands of stories of that, but I'll try to share two stories, one from India and one from Nepal. My two protagonists. While talking about, and I can, just think of so many of them that's coming in front of my eyes. But I'll talk about Kaushalya. Kaushalya, a very young woman in South India who was duped in marrying her maternal uncle who had HIV and AIDS. And she became a victim. She became a carrier. And this young girl she faced all the discrimination, the stigma that she faced, but she made that into her strength. So there were so many other positive women who joined her crusade. And she started a network, and we helped her in that, building a network of positive women. And I remember that day in Bigyan Bhavan, when that's this timid, shy girl sitting in between the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, on one side, and Sonia Gandhi on the other side. And there she is giving her fiery speech. And tears were rolling in my eyes. I was crying, sitting at the back. No, just comparing the Kaushalya then and the Kaushalya now. So I think these are things called empowerment. You can't measure it and say, this person is empowered. I think these things show. And the other story is our own Chandrika from Gorkha. Chandrika Shrestha, who had not even been to the district headquarters. She went with me to Rio. We started, when we talked about preparation for Rio, I was bent upon. I said, who knows about environment? The women who are dealing with fuel and fodder. It's not just the ozone layer and greenhouse effect. It's very important to listen to them. So we got 500 women in India, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Pakistan together. And they gave us lessons as to what it should be. And they were selected among themselves. And they had their own ways of selecting their leaders. And out of those 4,000 women, 4 were chosen. And 3 of them, the Bangladeshi couldn't go, so the 3 of them went with us to Rio and also to New York. So though not seeing the district headquarters, but they walked in the corridors of power in the General Assembly. They walked there, they talked. And they talked in different panels at the Earth Summit with Wangari Maathai and Vandana Shiva. And they faced the CNN and BBC live. That is the power of women. And that is what really encouraged me. But it's a pity. On one hand, we see these protagonists, these wonderful success stories. But on the other hand, we also see they're forgotten when it comes to counting them, when it comes to counting their contribution. Many, many women are not asked the question, what you want to be when you grow up. They are not asked that question. They are so much involved in the unpaid care economy, in the housework that they are given, that their productive role is also hampered. So now, let me just fast forward and take you to Islamabad. Well, I was invited to Islamabad because there was the first meeting of its kind, because after 23 years of war, there was a meeting being held on the rebuilding and reconstruction of Afghanistan. So I walked into Marriott Hotel in Islamabad, and I was flabbergasted. I was standing there. There were 700 men in that room, and 1 woman was invited, Seema Samar. And that was a case of exclusion. Weren't these the women? Even the widows, 60,000 widows that we quoted just in Kabul, they were holding their families, their nation together for 23 long years. And now when it comes to rebuilding, reconstruction, they're completely forgotten. They become invisible. They go back to their kitchen, which was not fair. And we see the same phenomena after any disaster. Let's look around us. It happened after tsunami in Sri Lanka. It happened after, the Gujarat earthquake, the Pakistan earthquake. Where were the women in the peace talks? Where are the women when these large decisions happen. When the money part comes, she's not in the round table at all. So that is the agony. That is the fate that we see. Now, as UNIFEM representative, I could not bear this. So I came forward. I didn't have a penny, but I came forward and said, committed. And I told the audience that we will be the first ones to host a meeting in Kabul for women. After, we hosted a meeting in Brussels for the diaspora. So as committed, then I had to go negotiate with the government first that we wanted. The Taliban were still in Kabul, for sure. They must have shaved and changed their dress, but they were very much there. So in that situation, I had committed to hosting a meeting there. Can you imagine? And then I had to look for funds. I went to donors and said, who's interested? Invest in women, invest in women. And I got donors to come and give us money too. And it was a day to remember. On the 8th of March, 2002, in the presence of 2,000 people, Afghani people, hundreds of Afghani women came together. And one of them came with their 10-point agenda to rebuild Afghanistan. And that is what they presented to President Hamid Karzai. And I had gone to Mr. Hamid Karzai to give the invitation. And I had personally requested, Your Excellency, we just don't want you and that lady who had come, Sima Samar, she was the Minister of Women's Affairs, just the two of you. I want your whole cabinet to be there. And he came and I was called. In the meeting, I went and he looked at me and said, Mrs. Joshi, I have brought my whole entourage, see. And I felt so, it was really worth fighting for, worth committing to. So you can imagine the hiccups I must have had in those several months. So, this working with women, when I say excluded women, I mean the trafficked women, women who have faced violence, women, migrant women workers who come back, who are labeled, and even home-based workers whose contribution is not assessed, and women who face disasters, nature and man-made disasters, that is conflict. So all these women have the same fate. So I got these together, and at the meso level, I was able to mobilize a lot of resources, a lot of human power, and get their voices amplified, as I said earlier. Now, this also gave me the courage to negotiate for them with world leaders. I had the guts to go and say, like with Bill Clinton, who was our envoy, UN envoy, to look after disaster. And with him, I lobbied for land rights of women in India after tsunami. And with President Kalam, I talked on violence against women. And I still remember that day when I said, Your Excellency, he was talking about Hamari maa aur behne. I said, but Your Excellency, they also get beaten up at night. Then he said, Mrs. Joshi, what do you think should be done? And I said, Your Excellency, if you just put in one sentence when you speak on 15th of August, that'll make a difference. And he did. He said, violence will not be tolerated. And that was a huge victory. And I still remember my colleagues bringing cake in the afternoon and said, we have to celebrate, after that speech. In the same way with the president of Maldives, we got him to, agree with the census to get sex disaggregated data for the first time in all the atolls of Maldives. So that was with the President Gayoom, and with Kofi Annan, it was on Planet 50/50. So now coming to the end, I could go on, but I know the young organizers are looking at me. So I'm coming to the end now. I could go on telling tales, but what I really want to say here is, let me remind you all that we committed to the MDGs, all the governments. 196 governments signed the MDGs, but we could not, we reached many goals, and Nepal was very proud. We reached education goals, health goals, but none of the country in the whole world reached the third goal, number 3, that was on gender equality. Wasn't it a shame? So, my challenge, my urge, my pledge to you all, the August gathering today is, let us not repeat that mistake again. We have got one more chance, is the SDGs. And we have an expiry date, 2030. How far is it? It's just there at the threshold. So let's do something about it. Let's join hands. One lone person, what I feel proud about when I look back, that was my stick. When I look back, a proud moment is I feel I have been that nail sitting at the back, holding the big canvas of these powerful women who would have been forgotten. So I feel proud about it. And let me tell you, we can hang many photographs if we join hands. And if we believe in women, count women, understand their contribution, be at the home front, be at the national level, let's try. The census is coming, not only in Nepal, but throughout South Asia. So let's try to count women in a new way. It's not just a head count. Let's look at their work, recognize that work, find the dignity that they work with, and join our hands and try to invest. And let me tell you, if we invest in women, our GDP will definitely go up. And we will not be called the least developed country anymore. We'll be in the category of developing countries. I can bet you, if we only do this. So let's invest in women, trust them, believe in them, and you will see we'll be living in a much, much better world. Thank you.